Tonight we are traveling back to medieval times, leaving the electric glow of the modern world behind to enter a landscape governed by the setting sun and the flickering torch. We shall cross the threshold of the great stone keep to witness the twilight of the crown, where the end of the day signals the start of a highly codified rhythmic sequence of events known as the royal sleeping ritual. The sun dips below the crenellated horizon of the 14th century, and the world undergoes a rhythmic transformation of profound environmental and psychological weight, as the natural light fades into a bruised purple and eventually a suffocating ink. The medieval palace transitions from a theater of public political power into a labyrinth of nocturnal shadows. This transition is not merely the end of a working day. It is the commencement of the nocturnal ritual, a highly codified, rhythmic sequence of events that governs the safety, dignity, and spiritual health of the monarch. In the medieval mind, sleep was never a passive rest, but a state of extreme vulnerability, a time when the soul drifted dangerously close to the supernatural, and the physical body lay open to the assassin, the cold, or the demonic. To manage this, the royalty created an architecture of security and a rhythm of the chamber. We begin our 3R descent into the great halls and the velvet silences of the medieval night, where every shadow has a purpose, every footstep is a signal, and every flame is a measured defense against the encroaching void. We will explore the microsensory world of the Middle Ages, where the texture of a linen sheet or the scent of a dying ember carried the weight of an entire kingdom's stability. This is the story of the great halls and the sleeping rituals, a journey into the dark heart of the castle, where the line between the living and the dreaming was as thin as the silk of a bed curtain. The primary rhythm of the medieval evening begins in the great hall, the massive, hollow heart of the castle keep. This is the social and thermal engine of the entire fortress. You stand at the threshold, and the first thing that greets you is the atmospheric weight of the space. The air is heavy with the scent of oak smoke, roasted game, stale ale, and the damp, peppery aroma of floor rushes that have been trodden underfoot throughout the day. At the center of the hall lies the hearth, a rhythmic generator of heat that breathes light and life into the limestone rafters high above. This is not a controlled or domestic fire in the modern sense. It is a living entity, a massive bonfire fueled by unsplit logs of oak and ash, some the size of small trees. The visual rhythm of the hall is one of deep, flickering contrast, the bright orange glow of the burning timber fighting a constant, losing battle against the impenetrable blackness of the high, vaulted corners. As you watch the flames, you see the smoke rise in a steady, vortex-like arc toward the louver, the rhythmic vent in the roof. The rhythm of the smoke is a visual metronome, a slow, twisting column of gray-blue haze that marks the passage of the evening hour by hour. This is the boring necessity of the heat, the hours spent feeding the flames to push back the clinging chill that seeps from the 5-foot-thick stone walls. The stone acts as a heat sink, perpetually thirsty for the warmth of the fire, creating a thermal war between the hearth and the granite. The sound of the great hall is a distant, hollow percussion. It is the rhythmic crackling of the green logs as the sap within the wood begins to boil, hiss, and eventually pop in a sharp, staccato rhythm. It is the clinking of pewter flagons against heavy, scarred oak trestles, and it is the heavy, rhythmic shuffling of hunting hounds on the rush-covered floor as they seek the warmest spot near the embers. You feel the thermal gradient as you move closer to the fire, rhythmic searing on your face while your back remains stiff with the drafty cold that rolls down from the unglazed windows. This is a biological struggle for comfort, a constant shifting of the body to distribute the heat. The medieval night is a rhythmic battle for the core. You watch the flicker of the wall torches, their rhythmic stutter casting long, distorted shadows of the tapestries. The tapestries themselves move in a slow, rhythmic sway from the invisible drafts that snake through the hall, making the woven knights and beasts appear to breathe and pulse in the dying amber light. The management of the evening light is a rhythmic exercise in resource depletion. Every torch, every rushlight, and every beeswax taper is a rhythmic countdown toward total darkness. You watch the torchbearer, his movements a rhythmic sweep as he replaces the spent, charring brands with fresh, resinous pine. The smell of burning pitch and hot tallow is a rhythmic presence in the era heavy, oily scent that signifies the price of sight in an age before electricity. It is a thick, cloying aroma that coats the back of the throat, reminding everyone present that light is a finite and expensive commodity. As the royal meal concludes and the high table is cleared, the rhythm of the hall shifts with a mechanical inevitability. This is the social stratification of sleep. The trestle tables are dismantled, with a rhythmic clatter and wooden slide, their components carried away by servants to make room for the lower household, the guards, the grooms, and the kitchenmen who will sleep directly on the floor. You watch as they roll out their woolen pallets and straw sacks, huddling together to share the dying heat of the hearth. There is a rhythmic thickening of the air as the fire burns down to embers, the hall becoming a quiet vault of breath and soft snoring. The hierarchy of the castle is physically mapped out on the floor. Those of higher status sleep closer to the fading warmth of the stones, while the lowest ranks shiver in the shadows near the drafty doors. This is the boring history of the hall, the hours of slow motion, social decay as the fire dies, and the status of each person is marked by their distance from the hearth. You feel the rhythmic quiet settle over the space, broken only by the occasional thud of a log shifting in the ashes or the whimper of a sleeping dog. The great hall, once a place of clanging metal and shouting voices, has become a temple of respiration. Above this sea of sleeping servants, the spiral stairs wait, leading to the solar, the private world of the royalty. As the last torch in the hall is extinguished, the darkness becomes absolute, leaving only the red eye of the hearth embers to watch over the sleepers. The transition is complete. The hall has surrendered to the night, and the pulse of the castle now moves upward into the stone screw of the tower. To reach the royal bedchamber, one must leave the fading warmth of the great hall and navigate the spiral staircase, a rhythmic screw of stone that serves as the vertical spine of the castle keep. The transition from the open, smoky air of the hall to the confines of the stairs is a sensory shock. The air here is no longer heavy with the smell of roasting meat. Instead, it is sharp, thin, and moving, smelling of cold mortar, ancient dust, and the metallic temps of moisture clinging to the granite. The rhythm of the ascent is the rhythmic tally of the step. You move upward in a steady, winding arc, your right hand tracing the rough, pockmarked texture of the central newel post. This is a defensive rhythm as much as an architectural one. The stairs are built in a rhythmic, clockwise spiral to favor the defender's sword arm, forcing any intruder into a cramped, rhythmic disadvantage where their weapon hits the central pillar. You feel the rhythmic vibration of your own footsteps echoing off the limestone, a hollow, percussive sound that signifies your total removal from the common world. The visual rhythm of the staircase is repetitive, circular, and disorienting. You watch the rhythmic ladder of the steps, each one worn into a shallow, smooth curve by decades of heavy leather boots. These indentations are the ghostly footprints of history, a rhythmic record of every soul who has climbed toward the heights of power. The light is fragmented and pulsing, provided by a single cresset lamp carried by the chamber squire. The shadows of the lamplight dance across the vaulted ceiling in a rhythmic spiral, creating the illusion that the stone keep itself is turning or breathing around you. The temperature drops noticeably with every 10 feet of elevation, the stone acting as a heat sponge that absorbs any warmth you carry, leaving your breath to hang in the air as a rhythmic mist. This is the boring history of the Ascentha. Thousands of times the monarch has climbed these precise steps to escape the coarse noises of the hall. It is a journey of isolation. You reach the mid-landing, where the air stagnates briefly in a windowless pocket. Here, the smell changes. It is the rosewater and dried herbs used to scent the upper galleries, a rhythmic olfactory signal that you are leaving the utilitarian zones of the castle and entering the sacred perimeter. The rhythm of the climb changes here. The steps become slightly wider, more formal, signaling your approach to the solar. You feel the rhythmic weight of the stone above you, the massive pressure of the castle's architecture pressing down on the silence. Every step is a rhythmic severing of your connection to the common earth. You are moving into a vacuum of power where the only law is the king's will. The squire pauses at the final door, a massive slab of seasoned oak reinforced with iron straps. You hear the rhythmic clinking of the heavy iron keys against his leather belt, a sharp and structural sound that vibrates through the narrow passage. The rhythm of the heavy oak door opening is a slow, resonant scrape of wood against stone, a deep, vibrating groan that marks the final transition into the sanctum of the crown. Inside, the rhythm of the palace changes entirely. The chaotic echoes of the stairs are replaced by a heavy, pressurized silence. The floor is no longer bare stone, but covered in thick, pliant rushes mixed with dried lavender and sweet flag, creating a rhythmic, crushing sound underfoot that signifies elite comfort. You have left the world of the common pulse and entered the nocturnal rhythm of the sovereign. Every breath you take in this room is a rhythmic acknowledgement of the king's absolute presence, a space where time is measured not by the sun, but by the slow decay of a beeswax taper. The royal bedchamber, or solar, is not merely a room for resting. It is a sequence of security and a thermal machine designed to protect the royal body. You stand in the center of the chamber, and the visual rhythm is one of deep, layered enclosure. This is the architecture of the cocoon. The walls are entirely hidden, draped in heavy, hand-woven woolen hangings and tapestries. Their rhythmic, geometric patterns and scenes of the hunt are not just for decoration. They are designed to trap a still layer of air between the fabric and the freezing stone wall behind them. This is a rhythmic thermal shield that prevents the radiant cold of the castle from reaching the king. You see the glow of the central brazier, its coals, a steady, rhythmic pulse of deep crimson that provides the only constant light in the room, casting a rhythmic glow onto the silver ewers on the sideboard. The sound of the chamber is a muffled, deadened acoustic that feels alien compared to the echoing halls below. The rushes on the floor act as a sound sponge, swallowing the rhythm of footsteps and creating a pressurized silence that feels thick and heavy against the eardrums. In this room, the rhythm of the world is excluded. You hear the rhythmic soft rustle of the bed curtains in the draught and the steady hypnotic ticking of a water clock, a clepsydra, dripping into a bronze basin in the corner. This is the rhythm of the watch, a constant, liquid reminder that time is passing even when the world is dark. You feel the psychological pressure of the seclusion, the knowledge that you are at the center of the castle labyrinth, protected by 3 layers of oak and 6 feet of stone. The scent is complex and aristocratic, a mixture of cedar wood smoke, frankincense, and the waxy aroma of beeswax. The center of this universe is the great bed of a state. It is a massive structure of carved oak, standing like an island of survival in the center of the dark room. You watch the yeomen of the stuff begin the ritual of the bed-making, a highly codified, rhythmic performance that takes nearly an hour. First, the straw pallet is beaten into a rhythmic flatness with wooden poles to ensure no vermin or lumps remain. Then, the feather bed, a massive linen sack filled with thousands of swan-down feathers, is laid on top. The rhythm of the labor is shake, smooth pat, shake. You feel the rhythmic compression of the air as the feathers settle, a soft, hissing sound that signifies the physical softness of the state. This is a biological trap for the heat, a structure designed to envelop the king in a thermal cocoon that will stay warm until dawn. This is the boring history of the mattress, the hundreds of hours of manual labor, from the plucking of birds to the weaving of linen, required to create a softness in a world where everything else is hard, cold, and stone. The visual rhythm of the bedding is a tapestry of wealth. You see the linen sheets, bleached to a starched whiteness with lye and lavender, their surface a rhythmic glimmer in the low candlelight. Then come the blankets of fustian and the coverlet of silk, added with a rhythmic snap and drape of the fabric. The colors are deep, saturated, and power-focused, crimson, azure, and cloth of gold. Finally, the canopy or tester is lowered, a rhythmic descent of heavy velvet that creates a microchamber within a chamber. Within these curtains, the rhythm of the world outside, the wind, the wolves, the political intrigue is silenced. You are left with the biological rhythm of the monarch's breath and the slow decay of the glowing coals. This is the rhythm of the enclosure, the ultimate medieval defense against the night, where the king is shielded from the miasma of the darkness by layers of silk, wool, and loyalty. As the king prepares to leave the waking world, the ritual of the night cup begins, a ceremony that serves as both a biological fortification and a final security check. You stand in the inner solar, and the air is suddenly transformed. The scent of the room shifts from the cold stone to the heavy, pungent aroma of cinnamon, ginger, and grains of paradise. This is the preparation of the hypocras, the spiced wine of royalty. The sewer of the wine approaches, holding a gilded nef, a massive silver chalice shaped like a ship, his movements a rhythmic performance of absolute loyalty. The rhythm of the preparation is pour, stir, taste, present. You watch the deep ruby liquid flow into the cup in a steady, rhythmic, viscous stream that reflects the flickering brazier light like molten garnet. The sound of the ritual is a muffled acoustic of metal and liquid. You hear the rhythmic clink of the silver stirring rod against the gold rim and the soft, rhythmic sloshing of the wine as the spices are integrated. This is the boring necessity of the tasting, the rhythmic pre-tasting by the servants, to ensure no poison lurks within the sweetness. You feel the thermal radiation from the cup as it is heated near the coals, the steam rising in a rhythmic flutter of aromatic vapor. This is a psychological anchor for the king. He takes the cup, and the rhythm of his drinking is slow and deliberate rhythmic gulp that carries the internal heat of the spices into his core. The chemistry of the night draught is designed to thicken the blood and quiet the humors, preparing the royal mind for the dream state. The visual rhythm of the wine is hypnotic. You see the rhythmic swirl of the dregs at the bottom of the cup, a miniature vortex of gold leaf and sediment. This is the peekaboo of the last draught, the sound of the cup being set down on the cupboard of a state with a rhythmic thud of heavy metal against velvet-covered wood. The scent of the hot wine lingers in the air long after the cup is drained, a rhythmic comfort that competes with the cold smell of the stone walls. This is the rhythm of the fortification, the use of the heat of the earth, the spices, to protect the heat of the body, the king, against the cold of the night. Every sip is a rhythmic defiance of the winter that presses against the castle glass. It is a moment of internal stillness before the heavy labor of sleep begins. Beyond the physical warmth, the night cup is a symbolic threshold. In the medieval consciousness, the belly must be warm for the spirit to be safe. You watch as the king wipes his lips with a sackcloth napkin, a rhythmic dab and sweep of the fabric. The servants stand in a rhythmic semicircle of silence, their shadows merging into a single dark perimeter. The wine acts as a social lubricant for the final orders of the night. The king's voice, now rhythmic and thickened by the spice, issues the last commands to the guards. This is the acoustic of authority in its most intimate form. The wine is not just a drink, it is a vigilance dampener, allowing the king to surrender his mortal guard to the men standing around him. The rhythm of the sip has concluded, and the room moves toward the rhythm of the shedding. The transition from sovereign to sleeper requires the rhythmic removal of the social skin. This is the anatomy of the undressing, a process that involves 3 yeomen of the chamber moving in a rhythmic symmetry of service. You watch as the great ceremonial mantle is removed first. The rhythm is unclasp, slide, fold. The heavy fur lining, ermine or sable makes a rhythmic hushing sound as it is pulled from the royal shoulders, its massive weight a rhythmic burden that is finally lifted and transferred to the arms of a waiting servant. This is the boring history of the royal wardrobe, the hundreds of tiny pins, a glaze, and silk laces that must be removed with a rhythmic precision to avoid tearing the delicate, expensive fabrics. The visual rhythm of the undressing is a deconstruction of power. You see the doublet of crimson velvet being unlaced, the rhythmic crisscross of the silk cords being pulled through the gilded grommets. The sound is a rhythmic hiss of friction, the acoustic of the unlacing. Then come the hose, held up by a rhythmic array of points, silk ribbons tied to the undertunic. You watch the servant's fingers move in a rhythmic dance of knots and loops, a mechanical rhythm of the fingers that has been practiced for years until it is as fluid as water. This is a moment of physical vulnerability. As each layer is removed, the thermal barrier of the clothing vanishes, and you feel the rhythmic prickling of the king's skin as the cold air of the solar touches it for the first time since morning. The scent of the undressing is complex and human. It is the musky aroma of the furs mixed with the saline scent of the skin and the sweet residue of the pomander worn at the waist. The final layer, the chemise of fine Holland linen, is removed with a rhythmic rustle, revealing the biological frame of the monarch. He is no longer an icon of stone, but a man of flesh and bone. The rhythm of the nightshirt being pulled over his head is a rhythmic muffling of sound, a white, cloud-like fabric that represents the purity of the sleep state. You watch the clothes of the day being carried away in a rhythmic procession of color, leaving the king in a rhythmic stasis of white linen and bare feet. This shedding is a rhythmic metaphor for death. In the medieval mind, going to sleep was a little death where one leaves behind the trappings of the earth to face the judgment of the night. You watch as the king's feet touch the cold rushes of the floor, a rhythmic tread that leads him toward the bed. The servants' movements are reverent and rhythmic, their eyes averted from the king's naked humanity. There is a rhythmic tension in the room as the man who rules the land becomes a man who needs help to climb into his blankets. The acoustic of the fabric is the only thing that fills the silence, the snap of the linen, the thud of the discarded leather boots, the clink of the royal signet ring being placed on a velvet cushion. The rhythm of the skin has replaced the rhythm of the steel. The king does not sleep alone in the silence of the tower. He is protected by the human buffer, the squire of the body, who sleeps on the pallet bed at the foot of the great bed of estate. The rhythm of the squire is the rhythm of the vigil. You watch as the squire unrolls his portable mattress, a rhythmic thud and slide of leather, wool, and straw against the dry rushes of the floor. The air at this floor level is colder and dustier, smelling of dried herbs, old boot leather, and the dampness of the stone. This is a social rhythm of sacrifice. The squire's body is a rhythmic physical obstacle. Any assassin or intruder must first step over the physicality of the servant to reach the sanctity of the crown. The sound of the pallet watch is a suppressed acoustic of readiness. You hear the rhythmic creak of the squire's leather jerkin as he lies down and the sharp metallic clink of his dagger being placed rhythmically beneath his straw pillow. This is the acoustic of the guard. The squire does not sleep with the rhythm of the deep. He sleeps with the rhythm of the ear, a shallow, alert breathing that is tuned to the internal noises of the castle. He listens for the rhythmic click of a latch, the soft scrape of a shoe on stone, or the interruption of the king's own rhythmic snoring. You feel the rhythmic tension between the two sleepers, the deep, heavy pulse of the king within the velvet curtains, and the light, skittish pulse of the guard on the floor. The visual rhythm of the squire is a motionless shadow. You see him lying in the flicker of the watchlight, his eyes reflecting the amber glow of the beeswax in a rhythmic, periodic blink. He is a rhythmic extension of the bed's own architecture, a living gargoyle protecting the entrance to the dream realm. This is the boring history of the bodyguard, the endless hours of static boredom required to maintain a dynamic defense. The scent of the pallet is coarse and earthy, the smell of dog hair, raw wool, and sweat, a rhythmic contrast to the lavender, silk, and frankincense of the great bed above him. The squire is the grounding element of the room, the bridge between the royal dream and the brutal reality of the castle walls. As the final bell of the nocturnals tolls in the distant monastery, the squire settles into his rhythmic immobility. He becomes a sentry of the breath. You watch the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, a cadence that is faster than the king's, reflecting the anxiety of the watch. If the king stirs, if the king cries out in a rhythmic nightmare, it is the squire who will reach through the curtains to offer the rhythm of reassurance. This is a relationship of rhythmic intimacy. Two men separated by rank, but joined by the silence of the night. The squire is the sacrificial rhythm, the one who stays awake so that the crown can safely descend into the void of the midnight. The room is now a chamber of two pulses, one sovereign and one servant, both waiting for the dawn. In the far corner of the royal solar, positioned upon a heavy wrought-iron tripod to prevent the risk of fire, sits the clock candle, the primary rhythmic keeper of the medieval night. This is not a common tallow dip made of animal fat. It is a massive architectural pillar of pure beeswax, refined and bleached to a pale cream color. The air surrounding this candle is sweet and resinous, smelling of pressed honey, summer wildflowers, and the sharp, carbonized scent of the charring wick. The rhythm of the candle is the rhythm of the visual decay. You stand in the deep shadows of the room, watching the flame dance, a rhythmic, stuttering pulse of amber light that fights against the heavy drafts seeping through the stone window slits. The visual rhythm is a sovereign measurement of the void, the only way to track the invisible flow of time in a world without digital precision. You watch the melt pool form at the base of the Wicca rhythmic crater of molten gold that overflows in a steady, metronomic trickle down the side of the taper. The sound is a subtle, rhythmic plink, plink, as the hot wax hits the brass drip tray below. This is the boring necessity of the timekeeper, the physical consumption of the light to mark the passage of the small hours. The candle is marked with rhythmic notches or gradients, deep horizontal grooves cut into the wax at precise intervals. As the flame reaches each notch, a small leaden ball, embedded in the wax, falls with a rhythmic clatter into the metal tray. This is the acoustic of the elapsed hour. It is a sound that shatters the silence of the chamber for a fraction of a second, reminding the king and his ever-alert guards that the night is bleeding away. It is a rhythmic memento mori, a reminder that even the king's time is a finite resource being consumed by the flame. The sensation of the watch taper is one of thermal fading. As you move away from the candle toward the bed, you feel the rhythmic retreat of the light, the shadows encroaching on the heavy furniture in a slow-motion siege. These shadows are not static. They are living rhythms, elongated by the flicker of the wick into grotesque, pulsing shapes that crawl across the ceiling beams and the tapestries. This is a psychological grind. The medieval mind sees the death of the candle as a rhythmic metaphor for mortality, a visual countdown to the inevitable end. You watch the soot trails rise toward the rafters in a rhythmic spiral of black, marking the ceiling with a charcoal signature of the night's passage. This is the boring history of the candle, the hours of static combustion required to navigate the labyrinth of the dark. Every inch of wax consumed is a rhythmic step closer to the dawn, a mechanical exhaustion of the night's power that leaves the room slightly darker, slightly colder, and slightly closer to the light of the sun. The maintenance of this light is a rhythmic responsibility of the groom. Every few hours, a servant must enter with a rhythmic stealth, his feet barely making a sound on the rushes, to snuff the wick and remove the charred mushroom of carbon. This is the rhythm of the wick maintenance. If the wick is too long, the flame smokes and pulses irregularly. If too short, it drowns in its own wax. The servant's hands move in a rhythmic flick, the silver snuffer reflecting the flame for a brief rhythmic flash before he retreats back into the shadows. This is the invisible labor that ensures the king never wakes up in absolute, disorienting darkness. The clock candle is the heartbeat of the room's visibility, a rhythmic engine of fire that converts the labor of bees into the security of the crown. Before the final extinguishing of the secondary lights, the king performs the ritual of the nocturnals, the reading of the night prayers. This is the rhythm of the spiritual guard. You watch as the Chamberlain presents the Book of Hours, a masterpiece of pigment and gold leaf bound in heavy, rhythmic oaken boards covered in jeweled velvet. The air around the book is ancient and dry, smelling of old vellum, dried galling, and the metallic temps, the silver clasps. The sound of the book opening is a crisp, rhythmic snap as the parchment pages groan under the tension of the binding. This is the acoustic of the sacred, a sound that carries the weight of centuries of tradition and faith. The visual rhythm of the prayer is a symphony of illumination. You see the glimmer of the gold leaf in the candlelight, reflecting the flame in a rhythmic shimmer that makes the painted angels on the page appear to vibrate or dance. The king's hand moves across the page in a steady, rhythmic glide, his fingers tracing the Gothic script as if reading a tactile map of the soul. The sound is a low, rhythmic murmur, the Latin verses falling from his lips in a monotonous, hypnotic cadence. This is a metaphysical barrier. The rhythm of the prayer is designed to anchor the mind against the chaos of dreams and the whispers of the enemy. Every amen is a rhythmic closing of the door on the secular world, a spiritual locking of the gate. You feel the rhythmic calm that descends upon the room during the recitation. This is the boring history of the liturgy, the repetition of the same canonical rhythms that have been spoken by kings and monks for 1,000 years. The scent of the incense-infused pages mixes with the resin of the candle, creating a rhythmic, olfactory fog that signifies holy protection. You watch the turn of the page, a rhythmic rustle of heavy calfskin that signals the transition from the psalms to the intercessions. This is a task of spiritual fortification. The king is not merely reading, he is weaving a shroud of grace around his physical body. The words act as a rhythmic incantation that cleanses the air of the miasma of the day. As the book is finally closed with a rhythmic thud, the spiritual defense is complete. The word has been spoken into the darkness, and the rhythm of the divine presence now occupies the silence between the stones. The Chamberlain takes the book back with a rhythmic bow, his movements as regulated as the prayers themselves. This is the rhythm of the handoff. The book is placed back in its leathern case, a rhythmic sliding of surfaces that marks the end of the king's intellectual and spiritual engagement for the day. He is now spiritually prepared to enter the state of sleep, a state that the medieval mind viewed as a journey through a liminal space where the soul might encounter both God and the devil. The spiritual guard has been set, and the rhythm of the soul is now synchronized with the rhythm of the house. As the king finally settles into the deep pulse of the mattress, the castle itself begins to speak. This is the rhythm of the ghost hour, the time between midnight and dawn, when the architecture of the keep reacts to the falling temperature. You stand in the pressurized silence of the chamber, listening to the rhythmic groan of the massive oak beams as they contract in the midnight cold. The air is stagnant and heavy, smelling of stone dust and the faint vinegar scent of the old mortar. The sound is a microscopic symphony of decay. You hear the rhythmic click-clack of the floor tiles settling, and the distant, hollow moan of the wind as it is fluted through the narrow arrow slits in the 10-foot-thick outer wall. The visual rhythm of the ghost hour is a study in total shadow. Your eyes, now fully dark-adapted, perceive the room as a rhythmic grid of grays and blacks. You see the faint, ghostly glow of the white linen sheets reflecting the dying deep red embers of the brazier. This is the rhythm of the visual absence. The shadows of the bedposts are no longer stuttering. They are static pillars of darkness that define the geometry of the fear. You hear the rhythmic scuttle of a mouse behind the oak wainscoting, sharp, staccato scratching that sounds as loud as a hammer blow in the absolute quiet of the 3 a.m. hour. This is the acoustic of the unseen, a reminder that even in the king's sanctum, the lower life of the castle continues its own rhythmic existence. You feel the rhythmic vibration of the castle pulse, a deep subdoble thrumming caused by the high-altitude wind hitting the massive thermal mass of the keep. It is a sound that you feel in your teeth and bones rather than hear with your ears, a rhythmic vibration of the earth itself. This is the boring history of the medieval fortress, the hours of structural resistance against the relentless elements. The scent is cold and damp, the smell of the moat water rising through the foundations and the wet earth of the inner courtyard. This is the rhythm of the siege, the knowledge that the night is an enemy that is constantly probing the stone for a weakness, a crack, or an open latch. In this hour, the barrier between the natural and supernatural is at its thinnest. The rhythmic breathing of the king becomes the only human cadence in a world of mineral noises. You watch the rhythmic twilight of the embers, each one a dying star in the grate. This is the rhythm of the cooling. The heat that was built up during the day is now ebbing away into the stone, leaving the room in a state of thermal equilibrium with the night. The king breathes in a heavy, rhythmic stasis, oblivious to the structural war being waged by the wind against the battlements, while the castle continues its rhythmic shifting and settling into the deep freeze of the pre-dawn hour. This is the purest rhythm of the night, the sound of the world existing without the interference of the sun or the speech of men. While the king is encased in the velvet silence of the solar, the exterior of the castle is governed by a much harsher cadence, the rhythm of the wall walk. You leave the stagnant, scented air of the bedchamber and step out onto the battlement, where the transition is instantaneous and brutally cold. The air here is raw and unfiltered, smelling of wet slate, burning pine pitch from the distant watchfires, and the ozone scent of an impending storm. The rhythm of this space is the rhythmic clank of the mail. You watch the sentry, a man whose entire existence is reduced to a linear path of stone. His movements are a rhythmic cycle of vigilance, 16 steps to the turret, a rhythmic pause to scan the horizon, and 16 steps back. The sound of the patrol is a metallic percussion. You hear the rhythmic jingle of the hauberk, the thousands of tiny iron rings rubbing against one another, and the heavy, rhythmic thud of hobnailed boots on the crenellated floor. This is the acoustic of deterrence. The sound is designed to be heard. It is a rhythmic signal of presence to any intruder lurking in the ink-black void of the surrounding forest. The sentry's breathing is rhythmic and labored, his lungs fighting the chilled vapor of the night air. You feel the rhythmic vibration of the wind as it howls through the embrasures, the gaps in the stone wall creating a high-pitched whistle that competes with the deep thrumming of the castle's foundations. This is the boring history of the guard, the hours of frozen stasis, where the only task is to remain rhythmically alert in a world that wants to lull the mind into a lethargic sleep. The visual rhythm of the wall walk is a study in extreme contrast. To your left, the black abyss of the countryside, where the trees move in a rhythmic, undulating wave under the moonlight. To your right, the high stone wall of the keep, reflecting the rhythmic flicker of the watch torches. You watch the torchlight catch the steel of the sentry's poleaxe, creating a rhythmic flash of silver every time he turns. This is a geometric security. The sentry is a moving pivot in a system of sight. He watches for the irregular rhythm, the flicker of a campfire that shouldn't be there, or the unnatural snapping of a branch in the moat bushes. His eyes move in a rhythmic sweep from the horizon to the curtain wall, a mechanical scanning that has become an instinct. The scent of wet iron and old wool clings to him, a rhythmic olfactory guard that marks him as a creature of the exterior. Every hour, the rhythm is interrupted by the watch change. This is the acoustic of the password. You hear the rhythmic clatter of the new guard ascending. The wooden stairs, their footsteps, a crescendo of steel. The exchange of the watchword is a rhythmic verbal lock, a sharp staccato bark of Latin or Old French that signifies the transfer of responsibility. This is the rhythm of the relay. One exhausted body is replaced by a fresh one, ensuring that the chain of sight is never broken. As the old guard descends, their rhythmic clinking fades into the hollow silence of the courtyard, leaving the new sentry to begin his infinite loop of 16 steps. This is the mechanical heart of the Castle's Defensa, rhythmic pulsing of iron that beats throughout the night to ensure the velvet silence of the king's sleep remains undisturbed. While the king sleeps, the very walls of the solar seem to move in a rhythmic, silent mimicry of life. This is the rhythm of the tapestry shadows. You stand in the center of the room, and your eyes are drawn to the heavy woolen arras that lines the stone perimeter. Because the castle walls are never truly airtight, the subterranean drafts and wall breezes snake behind the fabric, causing the tapestries to billow in a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction. This is the breathing of the architecture. The visual rhythm is hypnotic and uncanny. You watch as a woven hunting dog or a stitched knight appears to heave with a sudden intake of air, only to deflate into a flat, rhythmic stasis as the wind dies down. The shadows cast by the dying brazier light catch these ripples, creating dark, undulating shapes that crawl across the floor rushes like fluid ink. The sound of the tapestries is a soft, dry friction. You hear the rhythmic hiss of wool against stone and the metallic clink of the iron rings as they slide along the hanging rods. This is the acoustic of the insulation. These fabrics are the boring necessity of the medieval Elita mechanical thermal trap designed to create a dead air space that prevents the mineral cold of the limestone from reaching the royal skin. You feel the microclimate within the room. Near the center, it is stifling and warm, but as you approach the tapestries, the air becomes sharp and moving. The scent is dusty and ancient, the smell of lanolin, defixatives, and centuries of trapped smoke. This is the rhythm of the fiber, a visual and olfactory record of the castle's domestic history. Every thread of the warp and weft is a rhythmic filter, catching the soot of the candles and the breath of the occupants. The visual narrative of the tapestry changes with the light. In the flicker of the watchlight, the scenes of the Old Testament or chivalric romance become a rhythmic play of morality. You see the glint of a silk thread, perhaps a thread of gold, reflecting the flame in a rhythmic periodic flash that looks like a winking eye. This is the psychological weight of the medieval decor. The king is never truly alone, as he is surrounded by the rhythmic gazes of the ancestors and saints woven into the walls. The shadows create a secondary architecture, a shadow keep that exists only between the hours of midnight and dawn. You watch the rhythmic stretching of a woven tree branch as the candle burns lower, the shadow reaching out toward the bed like a silent sentinel. This is the rhythm of the unseen guard, the way the inanimate objects of the room take on a rhythmic agency in the absence of the sun. Beyond the battlements lies the final, aquatic defense, the moat silence. This is the rhythm of the liquid perimeter. You lean over the crenellated parapet, and the transition is one of deep, damp muffling. The air here is heavy and saturated, smelling of algae, decaying reeds, silt, and the cold iron scent of standing water. The rhythm of the moat is a stagnant pulse. You watch the dark, oily surface reflecting the rhythmic shimmer of the stars, the water appearing like a black mirror that hides the sucking mud beneath. The sound is an absence of sound, a rhythmic vibration of stillness that acts as an acoustic barrier, preventing the clatter of the forest from reaching the castle walls. Occasionally, the silence is broken by a fluid interruption. You hear the rhythmic plop of a water rat, or the slow rhythmic ripple of a pike moving through the reeds. This is the biology of the defense. These small sounds are amplified by the stone funnel of the castle walls, creating a rhythmic echo that the sentry uses to map the darkness. You feel the thermal humidity rising from the water, rhythmic cling of moisture, slick and sweating. This is the boring history of the moat, the passive resistance of the water against the active heat of the castle. The moat is a heat sink of a different kind, a rhythmic stabilizer that keeps the castle's foundations at a constant, bone-chilling temperature. The visual rhythm of the moat is abstract and void-like. You watch the rhythmic drift of duckweed as it is pushed by the microscopic currents of the Nightwine. This is the acoustic of the liquid shield. The water is so still that it acts as a soundboard, carrying the distant rhythm of a horse's hoof on the road or the scuff of a boot miles away. This is why the castle feels so quiet. The moat swallows the noise of the earth. The scent is metallic and earthy, a rhythmic rot that signifies the fertility of the mud. As the mist begins to rise from the surface in rhythmic, ghostly tendrils, it cloaks the base of the keep, making the castle appear to float in a sea of vapor. This is the rhythm of the disappearance, the way the liquid perimeter eventually erases the castle's connection to the physical world, leaving it as a silent island in the heart of the medieval night. Inside the great bed of estate, the king has reached the rhythm of the deep sleep. This is the microsensory sleep, a state governed by the physics of the down. You move closer to the bed, and the air within the velvet curtains is stiflingly warm and humid, smelling of lavender, human warmth, and the sweet residue of the nightcup. The rhythm of the sleep is the rhythm of the respiratory wait. You watch the heave of the silk coverlet as the king breathes slow, rhythmic rise and fall that is the biological pulse of the state. The bed is not just furniture. It is a thermal engine that has captured the king's body heat and radiated it back into the feathers. The sound of the sleep is a soft, rhythmic friction. You hear the rustle of the swan down within the tick, the linen sack as the king shifts his weight. This is the acoustic of the compression. Every movement creates a rhythmic hiss as the air is forced through the fine weave of the Holland linen sheets. This is the boring necessity of the bedding. The feathers must be rhythmically aerated to maintain their insulating loft. You feel the weight of the blankets. Nearly 20 pounds of wool, fustian, and silk, pressing down on the sleeper in a rhythmic sensory enclosure. This is proprioceptive security. The medieval mind believed that heavy bedding prevented the vital spirits from escaping the body during the vulnerability of dreams. The visual rhythm is one of deep, crimson shadows. The light from the watch taper filters through the velvet curtains, turning the interior of the bed into a glow of saturated color. You see the rhythmic twitch of the king's eyelid, the REM pulse, signaling his journey through the labyrinth of the medieval subconscious. In this state, he is no longer a ruler. He is a biological variable in a thermal cocoon. The scent is oily and sweet, the smell of beeswax from the candle having infiltrated the fabric of the curtains. This is the rhythm of the biological stasis, the hours where the body repairs the corrosion of the day. The bed has become a sarcophagus of comfort, a rhythmic vault where the pulse of the crown is kept steady and warm against the mineral cold of the surrounding stone. To the medieval mind, sleep was not an absence of thought, but a rhythmic engagement with the supernatural. This is the rhythm of the dream lore. You stand in the shadowed silence of the solar, observing the king as his mind navigates the nocturnal visions. In the 14th century, dreams were seen as rhythmic prophecies or demonic temptations. The air in the room feels heavy with the weight of the unseen, smelling of burnt herbs used to ward off the incubus. The sound is the irregular rhythm of the sleeper S murmur, a broken cadence of Latin or French that signifies the struggle of the soul in the liminal space between the earth and the heavens. The visual rhythm of the dream state is reflected in the physicality of the body. You see the rhythmic clenching of the jaw and the sudden staccato movement of the fingers against the silk. This is the acoustic of the interior war. The king may be dreaming of saintly visitation or political betrayal, his pulse rhythmically accelerating in response to the ghost threats of his subconscious. This is the boring history of medieval psychology, the belief that the balance of the humors, the blood, phlegm, and bile governed the rhythm of the vision. A bilious dream was one of fire and war. A phlegmatic dream was one of water and sorrow. You feel the rhythmic tension in the room as the squire of the body watches the king's dream disturbance, ready to wake him if the vibration of the nightmare becomes too intense. The scent of the dream chamber is one of deep, waxy stagnation. The rhythm of the air has slowed to a sovereign minimum. This is the psychological guard. The medieval king lived in a world where dreams could change the law. A vision of a burning crown could trigger a holy war. You watch the rhythmic fade of the king's expression as he sinks into the deepest void of the 4 a.m. hour. This is the rhythm of the total surrender, the moment where the individual self is erased by the universal dark. The room is no longer a seat of power, but a chamber of souls, where the rhythm of the monarch is indistinguishable from the rhythm of the peasant. In the void of the midnight, the crown is nothing more than a rhythmic memory waiting for the shock of the light. While the king is encased in silk and stone above, the undercastle maintains its own nocturnal pulse within the great kitchens. This is the rhythm of the kitchen embers. You descend the narrow soot-stained service stairs, and the transition is one of deep, carbonized heat. The air here is no longer scented with rosewater. It is thick with the smell of cold grease, burnt flour, stale ale, and the metallic temps of scrubbed copper. At the center of this cavernous space lies the master hearth, a massive stone archway that during the day holds a dozen roasting spits. Now, in the deep midnight, it is a cauldron of dying fire. The visual rhythm is a low, pulsing glow, the deep crimson of the oak charcoal breathing in the draft like a biological lung. The sound of the kitchen is a restless, scuttling acoustic. You hear the rhythmic snap of a cooling iron grate and the distant, hollow drip of water from a stone cistern into a leaden trough. This is the acoustic of the aftermath. The boring necessity of the kitchen night is the maintenance of the heat. A single turnbrooch or scullery boy is tasked with staying awake to nurse the embers, ensuring the fire never truly dies. His rhythm is a slow, lethargic sweep, the sound of a wooden shovel moving ash to bury the live coals, a process known as curfew or couvre-feu. This is a thermal investment. If the fire goes out, the industrial rhythm of the morning, the baking of the manchet bread, and the heating of the royal bath will be delayed by hours. You feel the residual heat radiating from the soot-blackened stones, a rhythmic wave of warmth that fights the damp chill rising from the cellar floors. The visual rhythm of the scullery is a study in utilitarian shadows. Your eyes catch the dull glint of the battery de cuisine, the massive copper kettles and brass skimmers hanging from iron hooks. They move in a microscopic sway, reflecting the heartbeat of the embers in a rhythmic, reddish-gold pulse. This is the acoustic of the empty vessel. The scent is oily and sharp, the smell of lard, used to coat the iron spits to prevent rust, and the acidic aroma of the vinegar used to scour the tables. This is the boring history of the feast, the hours of invisible labor required to reset the kitchen for the dawn. You watch the kitchen boy huddle near the hearth, his own rhythmic breathing synchronized with the hiss of a leaking log. He is the guardian of the fire, a low-status sentry of the heat, whose rhythmic vigilance ensures the royal comfort 3 floors above. Adjacent to the heat of the kitchens lies a much colder, more atmospheric space, the great laundry or napery. This is the rhythm of the laundry damp. You step into a room where the air is saturated and heavy, smelling of lysope wood ash, wet linen, and the sharp herbal scent of dried orris root. The visual rhythm is one of spectral movement. From the rafters hang hundreds of Holland linen sheets and royal chemises draped over wooden drying frames. In the low light of a single tallow candle, these white fabrics appear as rhythmic ghosts, swaying in the convection currents created by the distant kitchen fires. This is the acoustic of the dampness, the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water falling from the heavy fabric onto the stone flags below. The sensation of the laundry is a clinging humidity. You feel the moisture settle on your skin like a cold veil. This is the boring history of the whitework, the grueling, rhythmic labor of the laundresses who spent the day beating, rinsing, and wringing the royal linen. The rhythm of the night in this room is one of chemical evaporation. You watch the mist rise from the wet sheets in rhythmic plumes of vapor, a slow-motion gasification of the day's labor. The sound is a heavy, wet muffle. The fabrics act as acoustic dampener, swallowing the echoes of the castle and creating a chamber of softness in a world of hard granite. Every rustle of the linen is a rhythmic signal of cleanliness, a visual promise of the starched comfort the king will demand in the morning. The scent of the lye is astringent and clean, a rhythmic olfactory contrast to the smoky stagnation of the rest of the keep. This is the rhythm of the purification. The linens are bleached by the moon and dried by the fire, a rhythmic alchemical process that converts sweaty cloth back into royal vestments. You watch the rhythmic sway of a silk tablecloth, its damask pattern appearing and disappearing in the shadows. This is a hidden architecture of luxury. Without the rhythmic toil of the laundry, the visual dignity of the court would collapse. The dampness is a rhythmic weight that you carry in your lungs, a reminder that the smoothness of the king's bed is paid for by the prickled, water-sore hands of the women who work in the sodden silence of the under-castle, leaving the interior of the keep. You cross the inner bailey toward the great stables. The transition is one of biological heat. The air here is rich and animalistic, smelling of sweet hay, old oats, ammoniacal bedding, and the warm, musky scent of living horseflesh. This is the rhythm of the stable breath. You stand in the shadowed aisle, and the sound is a symphony of muffled power. You hear the rhythmic grinding of teeth against hay, the heavy, rhythmic thud of a hoof shifting on the straw, and the deep, resonant blow of air through a horse's nostrils. This is the acoustic of the war machine. These are the destriers and palfreys of the royal household, their nocturnal pulse as vital to the state as the king's own. The visual rhythm of the stable is a study in massive shapes. You see the rhythmic rise and fall of a stallion's flank, the muscular cadence of a creature that lives for the rhythm of the gallop but is now trapped in the stasis of the stall. The light is provided by a horn lantern hanging from a beam, its dull, yellowish glow creating a rhythmic pulse as it swings in the draft. This is the boring necessity of the stable groom. A young boy sleeps in the hayloft above, his own rhythmic snoring merging with the biological noises of the animals. His task is the rhythm of the welfare, to wake if a horse becomes cast or if the rhythm of the chewing stops, signaling illness. You feel the radiant heat coming from the stalls, a solid wall of animal warmth that makes the stable the most comfortable place in the castle for the lower ranks. The scent of the fermenting straw is a rhythmic heat source of its own. This is the chemistry of the bedding, the slow thermal decomposition that keeps the horse's legs warm through the frost. The sound is a constant, low-frequency thrum. You hear the rhythmic clink of a halter chain against a wooden post, a sharp, staccato reminder of the restraint of power. This is the rhythm of the potential energy. In the morning, these animals will be the rhythmic extension of the king's will, carrying his authority across the landscape. But now, in the deep dark, they are merely breathing engines, their rhythmic contentment, a signal that the castle's muscle is at rest. The stable is a chamber of biological trust, where the rhythm of the heart replaces the rhythm of the sword. High above the stables, in a vaulted stone chamber, reinforced with double-locked oak doors, lies the armory. This is the rhythm of the cold iron. You enter this space, and the sensory transition is immediate and mineral. The air here is sharp, dry, and static, smelling of lanolin oil, ground charcoal, beechwood, and the astringent, bitter temps of oxidizing steel. This is the acoustic of the unspoken war. Unlike the biological warmth of the stables or the smoky heat of the kitchens, the armory is a heat vacuum. The hundreds of suits of plate armor and the racks of poleaxes act as thermal sinks, absorbing every joule of warmth from the room and radiating back a bone-deep chill. The visual rhythm is one of repetitive vertical geometry, the rhythmic alignment of spears, halberds, and longswords, their steel tips catching the dull, gray moonlight in a rhythmic silver stutter. The sound of the armory is a pressurized, metallic silence. You hear the rhythmic clink of a single chainmail link settling against its neighbor, a sound so small it would be lost in the day. But in the midnight, it carries the acoustic weight of a hammer blow. This is the acoustic of the potential. These objects are in a state of rhythmic stasis, waiting for the rhythm of the muster. You watch the rhythmic distortion of the room in the curved surface of a great bassinet helmet. The polished steel warps the shadows of the rafters into liquid spirals. This is the boring history of the armorer's polish. Every inch of this steel has been rubbed rhythmically with oil and fine sand for thousands of hours to prevent the slow-motion rot of rust. You feel the rhythmic weight of the history within the metal. the iron ore pulled from the rhythmic depths of the earth, smelted in a pulsing furnace, and hammered into a second skin for the royal knights. The sensation of the room is stiff and unyielding. As you move between the racks, your own breath creates a rhythmic cloud of vapor that condenses instantly on the cold surfaces of the breastplates. This is the rhythm of the condensation, the way the biological breath of the intruder is captured and frozen by the mineral ego of the iron, the scent of the sheep. Fat used to grease the joints of the gauntlets is heavy and oily, a rhythmic olfactory shield against the dampness. This is the mechanical reality of the medieval knight. While the king dreams of heavenly Jerusalem, his physical security rests in this vault of cold geometry. The armory is a silent choir of steel, its rhythmic stillness a testament to the boring necessity of maintenance. As the wind whistles through the narrow vent holes in the masonry, the suits of armor seem to vibrate with a subaudible rhythmic hum, as if the iron itself is shivering in the 4 a.m. frost, waiting for the rhythm of the morning sun to expand its molecules once more. Inside the Royal Solar, the rhythm of the security faces its most dangerous moment, the midnight crisis of the light. This is the rhythm of the guttering candle. You stand by the great bed of a state, and the air has become thin and frigid. The watch taper, once a proud pillar of beeswax, has burned down to a deformed stub of melting fat. The rhythm of the flame has changed from a steady pulse to a hectic, panic-stricken flicker. The visual rhythm is violent and unstable, as the wick drowns in the pool of molten wax. The shadows in the room begin to leap and recede in a rhythmic, stuttering expansion. This is the acoustic of the dying light. You hear the hiss of the flame as it touches a pocket of impurities in the wax, and the liquid drip of the overflowing melt pool, hitting the brass tray with a rhythmic splash. The sensation of the room is one of encroaching chaos, without the steady rhythm of the light. The geometry of the chamber begins to dissolve. The heavy velvet curtains of the bed appear to melt into the shadows of the stone walls. This is a psychological siege. To the medieval mind, the death of the light is the opening of the gate for the malefic spirits of the night. The scent is acrid and sharp, the smell of charred cotton and burnt wax as the wick struggles to breathe. This is the boring history of the snuffer's duty. The squire of the body, lying on his pallet, wakes with a rhythmic jerk of his head. He has been trained to sense the rhythmic alteration of the light, even in his sleep. He feels the thermal change as the flame cools and darkens. The squire's movements are a rhythm of silent urgency. He rises from the cold rushes, his feet making a rhythmic hush as he moves toward the iron stand. He carries a new taper, a fresh reserve of light. You watch the rhythmic transfer of the fire. He touches the old flame to the new wick for a brief, rhythmic microsecond. The room is plunged into a deep orange glow as the two flames merge, before the old wick is snuffed out with a rhythmic pinch of his fingers. The scent of fresh beeswax immediately replaces the acrid smoke. This is the rhythm of the continuity. The crisis is averted. The visual order of the room is restored. You feel the rhythmic relaxation of the squire as he returns to his pallet. The acoustic of the new flame, once again a quiet, steady purr. This is the invisible war against the void, a battle won not with a sword, but with a rhythmic vigilance over the wick, ensuring that the king's peace is never fractured by the anarchy of total darkness. In the deep silence following the light change, a new rhythm emerges, the rhythm of the sudden draft. This is the acoustic of the breach. Despite the massive solidity of the 5-foot thick walls, the castle is not a hermetic seal. As the external barometric pressure shifts with the pre-dawn cold, a rhythmic column of air is forced through a microscopic fissure in the stone or the lead leading of a high window pane. You feel the thermal needle enter the room, a rhythmic jet of ice that cuts through the stagnant warmth of the solar. The air whistles as it is compressed through the narrow gap, creating a high-pitched rhythmic flute note that vibrates against the wooden wainscoting. The visual rhythm of the draft is captured by the tapestries. You watch as the heads of the woven saints on the wall appear to nod in a rhythmic sway as the air inflates the fabric from behind. This is the architecture of the invisible. The draft creates a rhythmic ripple in the heavy bed curtains, making the silk embroidery shimmer in a rhythmic undulation. The sound is a low, mournful hooting, the acoustic of the wind tunnel. This is the boring necessity of the wall-filling medieval. Builders used rubble and mortar to fill the core of the walls, but over centuries, the rhythmic vibrations of the earth cause settling voids that allow the wind to tunnel through the masonry. You feel the rhythmic chill settle on the floor, surging through the rushes like a liquid tide of cold. The squire of the body senses the thermal interruption. He knows that if this draft reaches the great bed, the king will wake with a congestion of the lungs. He performs the rhythm of the search. He moves along the perimeter of the room, his hand held out to feel the air, a rhythmic scanning of the wall. When his hand hits the cold stream, the sound is a rhythmic hiss against his palm. He uses a heavy woolen rag to plug the fissura, rhythmic stuffing and tamping of the material into the stone. This is the boring history of the draft excluder, the constant, rhythmic patchwork required to keep the industrial scale cold at bay. As the whistle dies down to a faint murmur, the thermal integrity of the room is re-established. You watch the tapestries deflate into a rhythmic stasis. The breach has been silenced, and the room returns to its rhythmic compression, a pressurized vault where the only moving air is the steady, rhythmic breath of the sovereign sleeper. In the deepest well of the night, between the 3rd and 4th hours of the morning, the rhythm of security is suddenly tested by a sound that does not belong to the natural sighing of the castle. This is the rhythm of the rattle. You stand near the inner door of the Royal Solar, a massive portal of seasoned oak, 3 inches thick and reinforced with horizontal iron bars. The air here is stagnant and cold, smelling of old oil and the bitter, metallic temps. Suddenly, there is a mechanical interruption, a rhythmic scrape of metal against metal, followed by the sharp staccato rattle of the iron latch handle. This is not the wind vibration or the settling of the stone. This is the rhythmic application of human force. The sound is a sensory violation of the pressurized silence within the chamber. You hear the rhythmic click of the internal tumbler as someone on the other side attempts to find the center of gravity in the lock. This is the acoustic of the intrusion. The sound carries a frequency of intent that is instantly recognizable to the squire of the body. He wakes not with a start, but with a rhythmic, fluid precision, his hand moving toward the hilt of his dagger of mercy with a sound that is a soft, sibilant hiss of steel against leather. The acoustic of the draw is a rhythmic countersignal to the rattle of the door. This is the boring history of the lock mechanism, the hours spent by the castle smith, hammering the wrought iron into a shape that is intentionally heavy and noisy, so that no entry can ever be silent. The visual rhythm of the door is hypnotic in its stillness. You watch the iron latch as it moves up and down in a rhythmic, stuttering arc, a fraction of an inch at a time. This is the visual tally of the attempt. The shadow of the latch, cast by the dying brazier light, dances across the cross-planked oak like a dark finger. This is a psychological siege contained in a single square inch of metal. The boring necessity of the lock is its mechanical resistance. You feel the rhythmic vibration through the flourishes, subdouble thrumming as the force from the door handle is transferred into the stone doorframe. This is the physics of the barrier, the way the mass of the oak absorbs and dampens the energy of the intruder, converting malice into a hollow, rhythmic groan. The squire stands in a rhythmic crouch, his breathing measured and shallow, to allow his ears to capture the micro sounds from the hallway. He listens for the secondary rhythm, the scuff of a woolen shoe or the rhythmic chink of hidden chainmail. This is the acoustic of the hallway echo. Because the stairs are a stone spiral, the sound of the intruder's breath is compressed and funneled upward, creating a rhythmic hissing that the squire uses to calculate the weight of the threat. Is it a lost servant, a drunken guard, or a calculated assassin? The rhythm of the decision takes place in the silence of the void. He watches the latch for the third rattle, the rhythmic threefold knock that signifies a messenger of the state. When the third rattle does not come, the rhythm of the vigilance becomes lethal. The scent of the door area is acrid, the smell of cold sweat and iron oxide as the moisture from the squire's hand begins to react with the metal of his blade. This is the chemistry of the threat. The rhythm of the latch finally stops. The sound is replaced by a slow, retreating scrape, the rhythm of the withdrawal. The intruder has realized the mechanical impossibility of the door and the acoustic alertness of the room. You watch the latch return to its neutral position with a final, rhythmic clack. The squire does not move for another 10 minutes, his body a rhythmic extension of the door's own inertia. This is the boring history of the no event, the hours of high-tension stillness that occur when a threat is met and repelled by nothing more than a piece of iron and a man's ear. The rhythm of the piece is restored, but the acoustic of the room has been forever altered by the memory of the rattle. As the midnight hour transitions into the wolf hour, the exterior temperature drops toward its absolute minimum, and the castle begins to undergo the rhythm of the winter frost. This is the mechanical attack of the cold. You stand near the great window embrasure of the solar, where the 5-foot-thick stone meets the leaded glass. The transition is one of biological dehydration. The air here is so cold that it stings the interior of the nostrils, smelling of frozen dust, shattered granite, and the sharp ozone tang of the night ice. The rhythm of the frost is a slow, crystalline growth. You watch the microscopic spikes of ice as they form on the iron bars of the window, a rhythmic expansion of water molecules that creates a white, fur-like coating over the black metal. The visual rhythm of the frost is a study in fractal geometry. You see the rhythmic patterns of the hoarfrost spreading across the stone mullions, following the microscopic veins and cracks in the limestone. This is the rhythm of the mineral penetration. The frost is not just sitting on the stone, it is infiltrating it. You watch as the crystal lattice grows in rhythmic pulses, each spike of ice a micro-lever that pries at the mortar. This is the boring history of the castle erosion, the slow-motion destruction of the fortress by the rhythmic freezing and thawing of the seasons. You feel the thermal sink of the wall. If you place your hand near the stone, The heat of your body is rhythmically sucked into the infinity of the granite, leaving your skin brittle and gray. The sound of the frost is a high-frequency, acoustic. You hear the rhythmic tinkling of the ice as it contracts against the glass and the sharp, gunshot-like crack of a stone spalling, a small flake of limestone shattering off the wall due to the plot expansion of trapped moisture. This is the acoustic of the winter pressure. The boring necessity of the solar heat is now apparent. The central brazier is fighting a losing battle against the mineral cold. You watch the rhythmic flicker of the coals as they attempt to radiate heat into a room that is being squeezed by the atmospheric weight of the frost. The rhythm of the thermal decay is visible in the steam rising from the squire's breath, a rhythmic cloud of condensation that freezes before it can reach the ceiling. The sensation of the room is one of increasing density. The cold air is heavier than the warm air, and it settles on the floor rushes in a rhythmic tide of ice. You feel the rhythmic numbing of your extremities, the way that blood flow in your feet regulates itself to protect the core. This is the biological rhythm of the winter survival. The king, within his layered cocoon of down and silk, is oblivious to this mineral war. But the squire on the floor feels every increment of the frost. He pulls his fustian cloak tighter in a rhythmic shiver, a mechanical response of the muscles designed to generate kinetic heat. This is the rhythm of the tremor, a biological metronome that marks the survival threshold of the medieval night. The scent of the frost is empty and sterile. It erases the smell of the lavender and the smoke, leaving only a metallic sharpness that feels sharp as a knife in the lungs. This is the rhythm of the olfactory silence. You watch the rhythmic advance of the frost. Across the silk wall hangings, the fabric becoming stiff and crunchy as the moisture within the wool crystallizes. This is the ultimate enclosure. The castle is no longer a building of men. It is a formation of ice. The rhythm of the stone has become synchronized with the rhythm of the tundra. As the moonlight hits the frosted battlements, the entire keep shimmers with a pale, dead light, a luminous monument to the rhythmic power of the winter to silence the world of the living. In contrast to the sharpness of the winter, the rhythm of the summer night in the castle is one of suffocating density. This is the rhythm of the sweating wall. You stand in the solar during the dog days of August, and the transition is one of biological heaviness. The air here is thick, motionless, and saturated, smelling of damp wool, fermenting rushes, ancient dust, and the sweet, sickly aroma of rotting flowers. Because the 5-foot-thick walls have a high thermal inertia, they have absorbed the intense heat of the summer sun for 14 hours. Now, in the midnight, they are radiating that heat back into the room in a rhythmic thermal pulse that feels like a physical weight against the skin. The visual rhythm of the summer night is liquid and dark. You see the condensation forming on the surface of the limestone blocks, a process known as the sweating, because the internal air is saturated with moisture from the moat, and the stone core remains slightly cooler than the air temperature. The water beads and coalesces in rhythmic runs down the masonry. You watch as a single drop of water gathers at the edge of a carved corbel, hanging in a rhythmic teardrop shape before falling into the rushes with a dull, heavy thud. This is the acoustic of the humidity, a rhythmic drip, drip, drip that echoes through the heavy silence of the chamber. The sound of the summer night is a low-frequency droning. You hear the rhythmic buzz of a large bluebottle fly trapped behind the tapestries and the hollow rhythmic churning of the mote insects outside the window. This is the acoustic of the biological excess. Unlike the winter silence, the summer night is noisy with life. You hear the rhythmic creak of the woodwork as the furniture and the bed frame expand in the heat and moisture. This is the boring history of the carpentry, the stress placed on the mortise and tenon joints by the rhythmic swelling of the oak. You feel the tactile stickiness of the air. Every surface you touch, the silk, the velvet, the stone, is clammy and damp, as if the castle itself is perspiring under the weight of the season. The sensation of the room is claustrophobic. The heavy bed curtains, designed to keep in the heat during the winter, are now a thermal prison. You watch the rhythmic struggle of the king as he tosses and turns beneath the single linen sheet. This is the rhythm of the thermal unrest. The rhythmic breathing is no longer deep and steady, but short and labored, as the lungs fight the water-heavy air. The scent of the room becomes aggressive. The lavender has turned sour, and the smell of the floor rushes has become a hay-like fermentation. This is the chemistry of the summer stagnation, the way the enclosed space concentrates the organic byproducts of the biological life within it. The visual rhythm of the watch taper is languid and oily. The beeswax is soft in the heat, and the flame burns with a lazy yellow heaviness that produces a thick, rhythmic soot trail. This is the acoustic of the stagnation. The drafts that were so violent in the winter are now non-existent, leaving the air to rot in place. You watch the rhythmic movement of the squire as he uses a hand fan of peacock's feathers to move the air over the king's face. A rhythmic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. That is the only mechanical relief in the room. This is the boring necessity of the cooling ritual. As the dawn approaches, the humidity reaches its peak, and the castle walls appear to glisten like wet skin in the faint pre-dawn gray, a rhythmic monument to the heat that will only be erased by the first breeze of the morning sun. The transition from the wolf hour to the grauer is announced not by the sun, but by a biological acoustic that pierces the mineral silence of the castle. This is the rhythm of the first signal. You stand on the north battlements, where the air is at its maximum density and coldest stasis. The sky is no longer pitch black. It has transitioned into a deep, bruised indigo that smells of damp moss, wet slate, and the electric temps of the morning dew. Suddenly, from the ancient oak forest beyond the moat, comes a single, rhythmic chirp, the sentinel note of a robin or a thrush. This is the acoustic breach of the night's monopoly. It is a rhythmic vibration of the air that signals the chemical awakening of the world. The sound of the first bird is a sensory disruption for the palace guard. You watch the sentry as he pauses in his rhythmic 16-step patrol. His head cocks to the side, his ears capturing the high-frequency cadence of the birdsong. This is the acoustic of the relief. To the medieval mind, the first song is a spiritual guarantee that the sun will return, a rhythmic reassurance that the forces of the dark have been held at bay for another cycle. The visual rhythm of the pre-dawn is a chromatic shift. You see the crenellated horizon begin to harden against the sky, the soft, fuzzy shadows of the night turning into sharp, geometric silhouettes. This is the rhythm of the visual definition. The world is being redrawn by the approaching light, a slow-motion inking of the landscape. The boring history of the pre-dawn lies in the atmospheric pressure as the sun's energy begins to agitate the molecules of the upper atmosphere. A rhythmic breeze is generated, the dawnwind. You feel this thermal current as it snakes along the battlements, carrying the scent of the forest floor, the smell of rotting leaves, pine, resin, and wild garlic into the stagnant pockets of the castle's curtain wall. This is the rhythm of the olfactory invasion. The mineral smell of the stone is being overpowered by the biological smell of the waking earth. You watch the mist in the moat react to this breeze. It twists and coils in rhythmic vortices, appearing to retreat from the castle walls like a defeated army. Inside the solar, the first signal is felt as a vibration of the air. The squire of the body hears the bird through the stone arrow slit. His rhythm changes from alert vigilance to mechanical preparation. He knows that the rhythm of the sleep is coming to an end. You watch him as he performs the rhythm of the stretching, a slow, creaking expansion of his stiff joints, his muscles groaning after hours of frozen immobility on the floor rushes. This is the acoustic of the human machine resetting itself. The scent of the room begins to thin out. The heavy aroma of the watch taper is being diluted by the cool, fresh air leaking through the window leads. This is the chemistry of the transition. The rhythmic stasis of the 4 a.m. hour has been fractured, and the geometry of the day is beginning to reassert its dominance over the anarchy of the night. The king, still deep within his velvet cocoon, does not hear the bird, but his biological clock reacts to the rhythmic shift in the barometric pressure. His breathing becomes shallower and faster, a rhythmic acceleration of the pulse that signifies the brain's preparation for the conscious state. This is the rhythm of the re-entry. The dream visions of the night begin to dissolve into the gray light of the chamber. You watch the rhythmic twitch of his fingers against the silk sheeta, tactile scanning for the physical world. The pre-dawn bird continues its hectic cadence, joined now by a secondary rhythm of other birds, creating a symphony of the awakening that fills the stone voids of the keep. The night is no longer a solid block of silence. It is a fading echo, a rhythmic withdrawal that leaves the crown standing on the threshold of a new history. As the gray light begins to seep through the heavy woolen hangings of the royal solar, the rhythm of the vigil undergoes its final, most delicate transformation, the shifting of the squire. This is the acoustic of the transition. You stand in the dimness of the chamber, observing the squire of the body as he ends his nocturnal watch. His movements are a rhythmic deconstruction of the guard. He rises from his pallet bed with a muffled rustle of his leather jerkin, his feet finding the cold rushes with a rhythmic crush and snap. This is the boring history of the servant's duty, the physical exhaustion that comes from maintaining a pulse of awareness while the rest of the world is sedated. The visual rhythm of the shifting is a study in muted grace. You watch the squire as he stows his dagger of mercy back into its boiled leather sheath with a rhythmic clinkus. This is the acoustic of the disarmament. The threat of the night assassin has evaporated with the light, and the squire's role now shifts from protector to attendant. He moves toward the heavy oak shutters of the window embrasure, his rhythm deliberate and slow to avoid jarring the king from his final layer of sleep. You feel the rhythmic tension in the room, the desire for the light fighting against the respect for the royal rest. The squire's hands move toward the iron bolt of the shutters, his fingers tracing the rhythmic texture of the wrought iron, waiting for the canonical hour to strike. The sound of the shift is a gradual crescendo of external noises. You hear the rhythmic clatter of the morning guard in the courtyard below, the acoustic of the changing watch. The rhythm of the steel is returning to the castle. You hear the rhythmic scraping of wooden buckets against stone wells and the distant, hollow lowing of the royal cattle being driven to the water gate. This is the acoustic of the industrial awakening. The boring necessity of the castle's maintenance is beginning to thrum through the walls. The squire senses this rhythmic vibration through the soles of his boots. He performs the rhythm of the hearth revival, moving toward the dying embers of the brazier. He uses a brass bellows to inject air into the colza rhythmic hiss, puff, glow that brings the deep crimson back to the center of the room. The sensation of the room is one of atmospheric thinning. The scent of the midnight, the heavy beeswax and spiced wine, is being scoured by the ozone scent of the morning. You watch the rhythmic smoke from the reviving fire as it coils toward the rafters. No longer a stagnant haze, but a dynamic column of gray and gold. This is the chemistry of the morning air. The squire's olfactory guard is now tuned to the smell of fresh bread and wood smoke rising from the lower kitchens. This is the rhythm of the sustenance. He prepares the morning ewer, a rhythmic pouring of water from a silver pitcher into a gilded basin. The sound is a bright, liquid percussion that shatters the final remnants of the night silence. The king, sensing the rhythmic change in the room's acoustic and thermal environment, begins to stir within the great bed. You watch the rhythmic movement of the velvet curtains as he reaches out a hand to part the fabric barrier. This is the rhythm of the resurrection. The king's face, pale and shadowed by the night's labor, emerges into the gray light of the solar. His eyes blink in a rhythmic adjustment to the visual presence of the squire. The vigil is officially ended. The human buffer has succeeded. The crown has been carried through the dark without fracture. The squire offers a rhythmic bow, a geometric acknowledgement of the restored hierarchy. The night pulse of the servant and the royal pulse of the master are once again synchronized for the rhythm of the day. This is the boring history of the squire's release, the moment when the weight of the kingdom's safety is transferred from the solitary man on the floor back to the man on the throne. The climax of the nocturnal ritual occurs with the opening of the shutters, a rhythmic mechanical event that seals the death of the night and inaugurates the day. You stand in the solar, facing the east-facing window embrasure. The squire's hands are poised on the heavy iron latches. The visual rhythm is tense and expectant. The gray light behind the leaded panes has reached a saturation point, a rhythmic pressure of unseen energy, waiting to flood the room. The sound is a sudden, metallic snap as the bolt is thrown, a rhythmic jarring of the air that echoes off the stone walls like a starting pistol. The rhythm of the opening is a slow-motion reveal. You watch as the massive oak shutters swing outward on their greased iron hinges. The sound is a low, resonant creak, the acoustic of the architecture yielding to the light. This is the shock of the sun. The first beam of direct light pierces the dust-laden air of the solar in a solid, geometric bar of gold. The visual rhythm is violent and transformative. You see the microscopic dust motes, the debris of the night, suddenly ignited by the spinargy, dancing in a chaotic, rhythmic swirl within the light column. This is the rhythm of the illumination. The crimson velvets and gold threads of the room, which were muted and ghostly an hour ago, explode into vibrant, saturated life. The sensation of the room is one of thermal explosion. Where the light bar hits the stone floor or the silk wall hangings, the temperature spikes by 10 degrees in a rhythmic molecular acceleration. You feel the physical weight of the photons hitting the mineral surfaces. This is the boring history of the solar heat, the way the massive stones of the castle begin their 14-hour cycle of energy absorption. The scent of the room undergoes a final chemical revolution. The cold stagnation is vaporized by the heat of the light, replaced by the smell of the outside world, the scent of the dew-damp courtyard, the metallic temps of the portcullis, and the sweetness of the morning clutter. This is the rhythm of the olfactory rebirth. The acoustic of the solar is now dominated by the external world. The pressurized silence of the ghost hour has been shattered by the rhythm of the castle's morning life. You hear the rhythmic shouting of the sergeants at arms in the bailey, the clanking of the iron cauldrons in the kitchens, and the rhythmic ringing of the chapel bell for lauds. This is the acoustic of the duty. The rhythm of the sovereign sleep has been replaced by the rhythm of the sovereign command. You watch the king as he rises from the great bed, his feet finding the sun-warmed rushes. This is the rhythm of the verticality. The horizontal vulnerability of the night is erased as the king asserts his stature against the horizon of the light. This opening of the shutters is a sacred mechanical act. It is the resetting of the social order. You see the squire as he steps back into the secondary shadows, his task complete. The visual power of the king is restored by the sun. This is the boring history of the iconography of the crown, the way the light is used to validate the authority of the man on the throne. As the second and third shutters are thrown open, the labyrinth of nocturnal shadows is systematically destroyed, leaving no pocket of dark for the spirits of the night to hide. The castle is now a vessel of the sun, its stone voids filled with the rhythm of the waking day. The 3-hour descent into the velvet silences has concluded, returning the traveler to the solid, metallic, and shouting reality of the high Middle Ages. The night pulse has faded, the day pulse has begun. As the shutters stand open and the room is flooded with the violent gold of the morning sun, the first physical ritual of the day begins, the royal wash. This is not a bath in the modern sense, but a highly codified, rhythmic purification of the extremities. You stand near the gilded washstand, and the air undergoes a secondary chemical shift. The smell of the night, the stagnant beeswax and human musk is leveled by the astringent aroma of lavender water, rose vinegar, and castile soap. This is the rhythm of the olfactory reset. The chamber squire approaches with a silver ewer, his movements a rhythmic performance of fluid dynamics. You watch the pouring of the water, a steady key-frequency stream that hits the gilded basin with a rhythmic splash and chime that resonates through the stone chamber. The visual rhythm of the water is crystalline and energetic. You see the rhythmic ripples as they radiate from the center of the basin, reflecting the solar beam in a shimmering lattice across the king's face. This is the acoustic of the awakening. The cold water is a tactile shock to the biological stasis of the king. You watch as he cups the water in his hands, a rhythmic scooping and splashing that sends droplets of light scattering across the floor rushes. This is the boring history of the morning hygiene, the use of thermal shock to contract the pores and redirect the blood flow from the core to the brain. You feel the rhythmic tension as the king scrubs his face with a fine linen cloth scented with dried orris root, a rhythmic friction that leaves his skin flushed and radiant. The sound of the wash is a bright, liquid percussion. You hear the sloshing of the water, the soft huff of the king's breath as the cold hits his skin, and the rhythmic snapping of the towel as it is unfolded by the squire. This is the acoustic of the state's rebirth. The soap used is a luxury commodity, a rhythmic alchemical mixture of olive oil, soda ash, and essential oils. You watch the lather form in microscopic, rhythmic bubbles that pop in the sunlight, releasing a sharp, herbal scent that scours the room of its nocturnal ghosts. This is the chemistry of the dignity. To be clean in the 14th century was to be spiritually prepared for the weight of command. The king's hands, veined and heavy with the history of the state, between his fingers like liquid time. The boring necessity of the wash includes the care of the mouth. You watch the squire present a small twig of lentisk or licorice root, frayed at the end into a rhythmic wash. The king cleanses his teeth with fine white wine and burnt alum, a rhythmic scrubbing and rinsing that creates a sharp vinegaro acoustic in the silence. This is the rhythm of the oral security. The scent of cloves and mint begins to infiltrate the solar, signaling the end of the biological night. Every movement is a rhythmic step toward the public iconography of the monarch. As the basin is removed with a rhythmic clinking of silver, the king stands, shivering slightly, his body vibrating with the cold energy of the water. The night pulse has been vaporized, replaced by the fresh, liquid rhythm of the sovereign morning. With the biological frame cleansed, the castle begins the rhythmic reconstruction of the icon, the dressing of the king. This is not an act of putting on clothes. It is the mechanical assembly of power. You stand in the center of the solar, and the visual rhythm is one of expanding color and texture. The yeomen of the wardrobe enter in a rhythmic procession, carrying the layers of the state across their arms like sacred relics. The air is heavier now, smelling of pressed velvet, new leather, silk thread, and saffron dye. The rhythm of the dressing is layer upon layer, a systematic enclosure of the vulnerable man within the hard shell of the majesty. The visual rhythm begins with the chemise of Holland linen. You watch as it is, draped over the king's shoulders, a rhythmic billowing of white that captures the sunlight. Then come the hose, the rhythmic pulling and smoothing of the fine wool over the muscular frame of the legs. This is the acoustic of the tension. You hear the rhythmic hiss of the silk ribbons, the points, as they are threaded through the gilded eyelets of the doublet. The boring history of the point tying is a study in mechanical precision. There are over 40 points on a royal outfit, and each must be knotted with a rhythmic tug and loop that ensures the geometry of the silhouette remains rigid and unbroken. This is the rhythm of the structural support. The sound of the dressing is a complex symphony of friction. You hear the rhythmic snap of the stiffened collar, the soft, viscous sliding of silk over linen, and the heavy, rhythmic clunk of the jeweled belt being buckled around the waist. This is the acoustic of the armor of state. You feel the rhythmic increase in the king's mass. As each layer is added, the doublet of crimson velvet, the tunic of gold brocade, the fur-lined surcoat. The king occupies more space in the room. His visual gravity increases. The rhythm of his movement becomes heavier and more formal. He is no longer shivering from the cold water. He is insulated by the thermal mass of his own authority. The scent of the new leather boots, smelling of tannin and tallow, is a rhythmic olfactory foundation that anchors him to the floor. The boring necessity of the dressing includes the application of the signet ring and the great chain of the order. You watch the rhythmic alignment of the jewels, the deep red of the rubies, and the cold blue of the sapphires, catching the sun in a rhythmic flicker of wealth. This is the rhythm of the visual deterrence. The king is being converted into a monument. The squire performs the final check, a rhythmic smoothing of the fur and a straightening of the lacing that is as precise as the tuning of a musical instrument. The acoustic of the room has changed. The soft muffle of the nightshirt is gone, replaced by the rhythmic rustle and clink of the state vestments. The king turns with a rhythmic swish of fabric, a mechanical declaration of his presence. The sovereign body is now fully encased in its social skin, ready to command the light. The final rhythmic transition of the morning takes place not in the solar, but in the private royal chapel, a stone vault of incense and echo. This is the rhythm of the morning mass, or lauds. You follow the procession of the state, descent of color through the gray voids of the castle. The air in the chapel is transcendental, smelling of frankincense, myrrh, cold smoke, and ancient limestone. The transition is one of acoustic expansion. The muffled silence of the bedchamber is replaced by the resonant, rhythmic chanting of the royal chaplains. This is the rhythm of the spiritual alignment, the resetting of the moral clock. The visual rhythm of the chapel is polychromatic and divine. You see the rhythmic filter of the stained glass windows, the blood red, deep azure, and emerald green splashed across the stone altar in a geometric dance of light. This is the visual language of heaven. The king kneels on a velvet faldstool, a rhythmic descent of the knee that signifies absolute humility before the divine architecture. The boring history of the liturgy is the mechanical repetition of the sacred Latin. You hear the rhythmic drone of the plainsong, a monophonic cadence that vibrates the internal structures of the stone pillars. This is the acoustic of the eternity. The king's pulse is now synchronized with the pulse of the church, a rhythmic merging of the temporal and the eternal. The sound of the Mass is a symphony of the elements. You hear the rhythmic clinking of the silver censer as it is swung by the acolyte, a metallic pendulum that cleanses the air with clouds of white smoke. The scent is hypnotic and thick, the resinous heat of the burnt incense fighting the cold dampness of the crypteer. This is the rhythm of the olfactory elevation. You feel the rhythmic vibration of the organ or the handbells, a sharp staccato ringing that pierces the chanting and signals the elevation of the host. This is the maximum rhythmic density of the Datha moment, where matter and spirit are pulsed together. The king's spiritual guard is reset. The dreams of the night are absolved by the vocalizations of the day. The boring necessity of the morning prayer is the social consolidation. You watch the lords and counselors as they move in a rhythmic choreography of rank around the king. This is the rhythm of the political gravity. The chapel is a pressure chamber where the hierarchy of the kingdom is confirmed by the light. As the final Amen echoes through the vaulted ceiling, the morning transition is complete. The king rises with a rhythmic clatter of steel and silk, a final acoustic declaration of his return to the secular world. He exits the chapel into the blinding white light of the great courtyard. The night ritual is dead. The day ritual of justice, war, and governance has begun. The 3-hour loop of the nocturnal king has closed, and the sun now rules the granite heart of the high Middle Ages. The spiritual reset of the Mass concludes, and the king is led back toward the great hall or his private dining solar for the breaking of the fast. This is the rhythm of the first intake you stand in. The light-drenched hall and the sensory transition is one of biological acceleration. The air is no longer muffled by incense. It is aggressive and savory, smelling of freshly baked manched bread, smoked bacon, salted herrings, and the sharp, fermented aroma of small ale. This is the rhythm of the alimentary ignition. The boring necessity of the meal is the restoration of the glucose levels after the 12-hour fast of the night. You watch the sewer of the table as he performs the rhythmic placement of the trenchers, massive slices of 4-day-old brown bread that serve as edible plates. The visual rhythm of the first meal is rustic and substantial. You see the rhythmic steam rising from the silver porringers of oatmeal and leeks, the vapor curling into the sunbeams in a dynamic dance of heat. This is the acoustic of the consumption. You hear the rhythmic tearing of the crusty loaf, a sharp, dry crackle of the hard-baked wheat, and the heavy, rhythmic gluk-gluk of the ale being decanted from a leathern flagon into a pewter tankard. This is the acoustic of the sustenance. The ale is not a social drink in this hour. It is a liquid bread, a rhythmic caloric injection designed to fuel the state for the hours of labor ahead. You feel the rhythmic warmth as the king ingests the first bit of mechanical activation of the digestive engine that signals the final end of the lethargic night. The chemistry of the fast breaking is a study in salt and fermentation. You watch the king as he spreads a rhythmic layer of churned butter across his bread of viscous, yellow sheen that reflects the morning light. The scent is oily and rich, the dairy fats fighting the acidity of the ale. This is the rhythm of the resource acquisition. The salt from the herrings prickles the tongue, a rhythmic electrolytic signal that wakes the nerves. The boring history of the medieval diet is visible here. There is no sugar or caffeine, only the steady, slow-burning energy of whole grains and animal proteins. You watch the rhythmic movement of the king's jaw mechanical grinding that has been practiced since his first tooth. Every swallow is a rhythmic acknowledgement of the earth's bounty. As the final crust is consumed, the rhythm of the hall shifts from eating to action. The trenchers, now saturated with the juices of the fish and the bacon, are collected with a rhythmic slap and stack by the almoner to be distributed to the poor at the gate. This is the rhythm of the social distribution, the way the king, excess, feeds the body of the state. The acoustic of the room becomes sharper, the clinking of coins, the shuffling of parchment, and the rhythmic clearing of throats as the councillors begin to converge on the sovereign center. The biological morning has closed. The political morning has begun. The king rises from the table with a rhythmic scrape of the bench against the stone flags, a structural punctuation that signals the activation of the law. The king moves from the dining solar into the chamber of council, a pressurized vault of policy. This is the rhythm of the collective mind. You enter a room where the visual geometry is rigid and symmetrical. A massive oak table, its surface scored by 1,000 blade marks and ink spills, dominates the center. The air here is drier and more intellectual, smelling of sheepskin vellum, oak gull ink, cold wax seals, and the faint vinegar scent of the clerk's sponges. The transition is one of acoustic compression. The shouting of the great hall is filtered out by the double-lock doors, leaving a pressurized silence where the only rhythm is the scratch of the quill and the low murmur of the advisors. The sound of the council is a staccato percussion of information. You hear the rhythmic unrolling of a great vellum scroll, a dry, rasping snap of the leathery surface that vibrates the dust motes in the air. This is the acoustic of the bureaucracy. You hear the rhythmic ticking of the clerk's pen as he dips it into the inkhorn, a wet, rhythmic click that marks the entry of the law. This is the boring history of the medieval administration, the hours of rhythmic transcription required to manage a kingdom by hand. You feel the psychological tension in the room. The councillors lean in with a rhythmic creak of leather chairs, their breathing synchronized in a pattern of deference. This is the rhythm of the power dynamic, the gravity of the king, silence pulling the thoughts of the council toward the center. The visual rhythm of the chamber is linear and scripted. You see the rhythmic flow of the ink across the parchment, the Gothic letters forming in a steady flowing arc of black carbon. This is the visual recording of the time. You watch the rhythmic hand movements of the Chancellor as he gestures toward a map of the borders, a geometric representation of the king's will. The scent of the molten sealing wax begins to infiltrate the room as a messenger prepares a writ. The red wax drips from the taper in a rhythmic melt pulse, hitting the vellum with a hiss and a thud. This is the rhythm of the finality. Once the signet is pressed into the wax with a rhythmic exertion of the shoulder, the word becomes action. The boring necessity of the council lies in the repetition of the minute. You watch the rhythmic review of the tax rolls, the grain quotas, and the judiciary appeals. Each item is a rhythmic step in the maintenance of the social order. The king listens with a rhythmic nod, his internal pulse now accelerated by the complexity of the state. He is no longer the sleeper or the prayer. He is the auditor. The acoustic of the room is dense with the rhythm of the logic. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows on the table shorten in a rhythmic retreat, marking the progress of the decision-making. This is the rhythm of the sovereign labor, the invisible work that holds the stone walls of the kingdom together. When the council rises with a rhythmic clatter of chairs, the theory of the morning is complete, and the king prepares to subject the physicality of his power. The king emerges from the council chamber onto the great gallery overlooking the inner courtyard. This is the rhythm of the kinetic reality, the Hanun transition. You stand at the stone railing, and the sensory transition is violent and overwhelming. The muffled intellectualism of the chamber is shattered by the industrial symphony of the castle life. The air is violently hot and dense, smelling of burning charcoal, horsesweat, sawdust, hot iron, and manure. This is the rhythm of the castle's metabolism. You see 1,000 rhythms interlocking in the space below the blacksmith's hammer, the mason's chisel, the groom's brush, and the soldier's drill. The sound of the courtyard is a fractal percussion. You hear the rhythmic ring of the anvil, a high-pitched, metallic clang that resonates through the limestone walls like a tuning fork. This is the acoustic of the armament. You hear the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the stonecutters squaring a block of granite for the new turret. This is the acoustic of the expansion. The boring history of the castle maintenance is visible in every swing of the mallet. You feel the rhythmic vibration of the earth as a team of oxen pulls a cart of timber across the cobblestones, a deep, rumbling grumble that shakes the foundations of the keep. This is the rhythm of the logistic weight. The visual rhythm of the courtyard is chaotic but ordered. You see the rhythmic flash of the soldiers' poleaxes as they perform the morning drill in the bailey, a synchronized wave of steel that catches the high noon sun. This is the visual language of the defense. You watch the rhythmic movement of the stable boys as they fork the fresh hay into the racks, a sweeping gold-colored arc of dust and straw. This is the rhythm of the biological fueling. The scent is multi-layered, the sharpness of the vinegar from the laundry, the grease of the kitchen spits, and the soot of the forge. This is the chemistry of the living machine. Every human pulse in the courtyard is dedicated to the rhythmic preservation of the stone structure. The boring necessity of the courtyard inspection is the confirmation of the material. The king watches the rhythm of the work, his eyes scanning for the irregularity, the lazy stroke, the cracked stone, or the lame horse. This is the rhythm of the supreme oversight. The castle is no longer a dream keep or a vault of shadows. It is a vibrant, shouting, stinking, and hard-working engine of war and peace. You feel the sun at its zenith, beating down on the gray granite until the stone itself begins to radiate a rhythmic heat that distorts the air. This is the maximum kinetic energy of the medieval day. The 3-hour narrative has reached its peak. The nocturnal ritual is now a distant memory, vaporized by the rhythm of the hammer and the heat of the sun. The kingdom is fully awake, pulsing with the rhythm of the living metal under the sovereign gaze. As the sun reaches its celestial zenith, casting the shortest, most intense shadows of the day, the king moves to the great hall for the ritual of high noon justice. This is the rhythm of the moral law. You enter the vast timber-roofed expanse of the hall, where the sensory environment is violent and public. The air is overheated and pressurized, smelling of hot stone dust, sweated wool, stale beard damp, and the sharp, metallic aroma of the royal mace. The transition is one of acoustic magnitude. The private whispers of the council are shattered by the rhythmic proclamation of the herald, a high-frequency, brass-stoned shout that echoes off the limestone corbels and vibrates the dust motes in the sun shafts. This is the acoustic of the public authority. The visual rhythm of the justice is a study in symmetrical hierarchy. You see the king ascend the dais, his feet finding the oaken steps with a rhythmic thud, thud, thud that signifies vertical dominance. He sits upon the throne of a state, a mechanical anchor of carved walnut and gilded leather. This is the visual language of the center. Around him, the litigants and petitioners move in a rhythmic choreography of supplication, a descent to the knee, a rhythmic bow, and the lifting of the parchment. This is the boring history of the common law, the hours of rhythmic grievance required to stabilize the social fabric. You feel the rhythmic tension in the hall. Every eye is tethered to the king's face, searching for the rhythmic nod of approval or the rigid stasis of denial. The sound of the justice is a percussive dialogue. You hear the rhythmic scratching of the court clerk's quill as he enshrines the verdicts in the great roll, a dry, scuttling sound that represents the conversion of breath into law. This is the acoustic of the permanent record. You hear the rhythmic clatter of the guards' poleaxes as they shift their weight on the stone floor, a metallic punctuation that reminds the hall of the force behind the word. The scent is complex and crowded, the musk of the peasantry fighting the lavender-scented silk of the judiciary. This is the chemistry of the Commonwealth. The king speaks with a rhythmic gravity, his voice low and resonant, cutting through the muffled murmur of the crowd like a cutter through wax. The boring necessity of the noon court is the resolution of the minute. You watch the rhythmic review of land boundaries and petty thefts. Each case is a rhythmic step in the maintenance of the king's peace. The king's hand moves in a rhythmic tap against the arm of the throne, a mechanical metronome of his patience. This is the rhythm of the judgment. When a verdict is delivered, the sound is a rhythmic gavel strike, the butt of the royal mace hitting the stone dais with a hollow, decisive boom that signals the end of the argument. This is the acoustic of the finality. The law has been pulsed through the body politic, resetting the social harmony for the afternoon cycle. As the sun begins its rhythmic descent toward the west, the hiker tour rises with a massive multi-layered clatter, the human machinery of the hall resetting for the rhythm of the feast. Following the moral order of the court, the king performs the mechanical audit of the state, the inspection of the great armory. This is the rhythm of the martial readiness. You return to the stone vault we visited in the midnight, but now it is transformed by the daylight. The gray shadows are gone, replaced by a violent, blinding reflection of the noon sun off the polished steel. The air is hot and oily, smelling of fresh linseed oil, ground pumice, raw iron ore, and beeswax polish. This is the rhythm of the military maintenance. The boring history of the armorer's workshop is visible here. The rhythmic ring of the planishing hammer as a mastersmith smooths a dint in a breastplate. The visual rhythm of the armory check is a linear survey of defense. You see the king walk the ranks of the harness, the suits of plate, standing on wooden frames like ghostly warriors. This is the visual language of the deterrent. He touches the rivets with a rhythmic scan of the finger, checking for the micro-vibration of a loose connection. This is the acoustic of the inspection. You hear the rhythmic clink of the chainmail as the squire shakes out a hauberk to check for rust links, a sound like metallic rain hitting a silver roof. This is the boring necessity of the vigilance, the knowledge that a single cracked link can fracture a kingdom's security. The sound of the audit is a rhythmic tallying. You hear the voice of the master-at-arms as he recites the inventory. 100 longswords, 200 poleaxes, 1,000 arrowheads. Each number is a rhythmic punctuation of the castle's lethality. You hear the rhythmic snap of the crossbow strings as they are tested for tension, a dry, explosive note that vibrates the stone walls. This is the acoustic of the preparedness. The king inspects the bowstaves, the rhythmic curve of the English U, his hands sensing the elastic potential of the wood. This is the chemistry of the bowstring, the silk and flax braided into a rhythmic engine of force. The sensation of the room is dense and metallic. The heat of the sun has expanded the iron molecules, making the armor feel tight and resonant. You feel the rhythmic heat radiating from the polished surfaces, a secondary sun within the stone walls. The scent is astringent and industrial. The acidic temps of the etching fluid used to decorate the royal buckler fighting the sweetness of the polishing oil. This is the rhythm of the iconography. The king selects his weaponry for the afternoon exercise, a rhythmic and sheathing of the great sword that creates a shimmering silver arc in the sunshaft. The mechanical audit is complete. The castle's teeth have been counted and sharpened. The rhythm of the defense is secure, and the king prepares to project this power into the green rhythms of the outside world. The final great rhythm of our 3-hour journey is the ritual of the departure, the transition from the stone enclosure of the castle to the green labyrinth of the royal forest. This is the rhythm of the hunt. You stand in the great courtyard where the energy of the day has reached its terminal velocity. The air is violently alive, smelling of excited hounds, heated leather, crushed mint, horsesweat, and raw meat. This is the rhythm of the predatory awakening. The boring history of the venery is visible in the choreography of the pack, the rhythmic milling of the great greyhounds and elans. They're breathing a hectic collective pulse of anticipation. The visual rhythm of the departure is a crescendo of motion. You see the rhythmic saddling of the great destriers, the tightening of the girth, the checking of the bit, and the smoothing of the caparison. This is the acoustic of the equine readiness. You hear the rhythmic blowing of the hunting horns, a high, piercing, triadic call that shatters the final remnants of the morning stasis and vibrates the window leads of the keep. This is the acoustic of the expansion. The king mounts his white palfrey with a rhythmic exertion of the core, his crimson cloak billowing behind him in a final wave of sovereign color. This is the rhythm of the projection. The stone labyrinth is being left behind. The king is moving into the open world. The sound of the exit is a massive, multi-layered percussion. You hear the rhythmic clatter of 40 hooves on the cobblestones, the jingle of the falconry bells, the yipping of the hounds, and the heavy, rhythmic groan of the drawbridge being lowered over the moat. This is the acoustic of the breach. The castle is opening itself to the world. You feel the rhythmic vibration of the portcullis as it is winched upward, a metallic, ratcheting sound that marks the final separation from the nocturnal security. The scent of the forest wind rushes into the courtyard, the smell of oak bark, ferns, and running water, a rhythmic invitation to the primal rhythms of the wild. The boring necessity of the hunt ritual is the confirmation of the king's health. You watch the rhythmic gallop of the procession as it streams through the gatehouse, a flowing ribbon of gold, steel, and meat. This is the rhythm of the sovereign vitality. The king is no longer encased in stone or linen. He is synchronized with the kinetic energy of the animal world. As the last rider crosses the drawbridge, the castle returns to its rhythmic stillness. The traveler is left at the edge of the moat, watching the dust of the royal departure settle in the sunlight. The rhythm of the king has transcended the walls. The history of the night is erased by the action of the day. The vigil is over. The sun rules absolute. Deep in the administrative wing of the castle, far from the warmth of the king's solar, the scriptorium maintains a solitary, rhythmic vigil. This is the rhythm of the ghostly record. You enter this vaulted chamber, and the sensory environment is frigid and intellectual. The air is bone-dry, smelling of raw animal hide, iron gall, powdered pumice, and the sharp vinegar tang of the scribe's cleaning fluid. The transition is one of acoustic repetition. In the 2 a.m. hour, a single monk or clerk remains awake to grind the morning's ink. This is a boring necessity of the medieval state, the mechanical preparation of the fluid of law. The visual rhythm is circular and hypnotic. You watch the muller, a heavy, flat-bottomed stone as it is rotated rhythmically across a porphyry slab. Between the stones lies a mixture of oak galls, iron vitriol, and gum arabic. This is the chemistry of the permanence. The sound is a grainy, rhythmic scrape, a continuous grinding that vibrates through the wooden desk and into the floorboards. This is the acoustic of the microfriction. You see the ink paste turn from a dusty gray to a deep, lustrous black as the iron molecules oxidize in the cold night air. The boring history of this process is the labor of the minute, the hours of rhythmic circularity required to ensure the ink does not clog the quill in the morning. The sensation of the scriptorium is mineral and static. Unlike the king's room, there are no velvet hangings here to muffle the sound. The acoustic of the vault amplifies every rhythmic click of the clerk's penknife as he scrapes a mistake off a vellum page. This is the acoustic of the erasure. You feel the thermal desiccation of the room. The parchment is hygroscopic, sucking the moisture from the air and from the clerk's skin. The scent of the sheepskin is barnyard and chalky, a rhythmic olfactory weight that reminds the traveler of the biological cost of the written word. You watch the rhythmic sway of the clerk's Taladip candler, low-quality flame that produces a hectic, greasy shadow on the wall, unlike the royal beeswax above. The boring necessity of the ink grinder's watch is the prevention of the sedimentary death. If the ink is not ground to a microscopic fineness, the laws of the kingdom will be blotted and unreadable. You watch the rhythmic movement of the clerk's wrist, mechanical endurance that has calloused his skin. This is the rhythm of the bureaucratic foundation. As the moon shifts its beam through the high, clear-story window, the ink slab glitters like a pool of black glass. The scriptorium is the lungs of the memory, a rhythmic processing center where the action of the day is slowly congealed into the permanence of the night as the clerk finally pours the finished ink into a lead inkpot with a rhythmic gurgle. The industrial night of the written word is complete, leaving the void to dry the pages of the eternal state. Beneath the foundations of the keep, where the limestone meets the bedrock, lie the great wine cellars. This is the rhythm of the fermenting deep. You descend the damp, spiral stairs into a world where the thermal mass is absolute. The air is heavy, pressurized, and sweet, smelling of oak tannin, sour grape must, damp earth, and the alcoholic vapor of the angel's share. The transition is one of biological weight. The acoustic of the surface is erased, replaced by a deep, subaudible thrumming of the earth's own gravity. This is the rhythm of the maturation. The visual rhythm is one of repeating arches and oaken curves. You see the great tons, massive barrels, holding 1,000 gallons each, standing in the shadowed gloom like mechanical sentinels. The rhythm is found in the drip, drip, drip of condensation falling from the vaulted ceiling onto the stavens. This is the acoustic of the pedration. The boring history of the winemaster is the nightly audit of the bung. You watch the cellarer move through the aisles with a horn lantern, his feet making a muffled squishing sound on the damp sawdust. He taps each barrel with a wooden mallet, a rhythmic thud, ring thud, that allows him to hear the level of the liquid gold within. The sensation of the cellar is viscous and cool. The humidity is so high that it settles on your cloak as a liquid film. This is the chemistry of the preservation. The wine is alive, a rhythmic chemical interaction between the fruit sugars and the fungal cultures of the staves. You hear the rhythmic sigh of a relieving valve, a soft hiss of carbon dioxide escaping from the fermenting vat. This is the acoustic of the biological pressure. The scent of the old wood is resinous and ancient, a rhythmic olfactory history of vintages from decades past. This is the wealth of the underworld, the liquid reserve that lubricates the diplomacy of the solar above. The boring necessity of the cellar vigil is the prevention of the vinegar death. If a bung dries out or a seal fractures, the royal vintage will oxidize into worthless acid. You watch the rhythmic movement of the cellarer's hand as he wipes a spigot with a vinegar-soaked rag, a mechanical protection against the bacteria of the dark. This is the rhythm of the invisible maintenance. The cellar is a cathedral of stasis, a place where time is slowed by the cold stone and the thickness of the oak. As the cellarer extinguishes his lantern, the rhythm of the fermentation continues in the absolute black, a slow-motion pulse of sugar turning to spirit that synchronizes the earth with the king's table. At the highest point of the castle, above the great hall, sits the mechanical heart of the new era, the tower clock. This is the rhythm of the escapement. You climb the internal ladder of the bell tower, and the transition is one of kinetic violence. The air here is thin and cold, smelling of lard grease, iron filings, pigeon guano, and the metallic temps of the great bell. The acoustic of the castle is dominated by a single monstrous pulse, the tick-tock, tick of the foliotanned verge escapement. This is the acoustic of the artificial time. The visual rhythm is mechanical and brutal. You see the great iron gears, their teeth hand-filed and greased with pig fat, turning in a rhythmic, stuttering progression. This is the visual representation of the minute. The boring history of the clockkeeper is the rhythm of the winding. You watch the mechanic as he heaves on a crank, lifting a 300-pound stone weight toward the rafters. This is the rhythm of the potential energy. The sound is a heavy, rhythmic ratchet, a clack, clack, that vibrates the entire masonry of the tower. This is the acoustic of the gravity being stored for the night. The sensation of the tower is vibrational. You feel the rhythmic impact of the pallet hitting the crown wheel through the soles of your feet. This is the chemistry of the friction, the heat generated by the iron teeth grinding against one another. The scent is oily and heavy, the smell of the machine overpowering the smell of the nature outside. This is the rhythm of the future, the way the natural rhythms of the sun and moon are being replaced by the metallic pulse of the escapement. You watch the rhythmic sway of the foliot, the horizontal weighted boraz. It oscillates back and forth, a mechanical metronome that dictates the schedule of the monks, the guards, and the king. The boring necessity of the clockwatch is the maintenance of the accuracy. In the 14th century, a clock could lose 30 minutes in a single night cycle. The clockkeeper must rhythmically adjust the lead weights on the foliot to compensate for the thermal expansion of the iron in the night cold. This is the rhythm of the microcorrection. As the clock prepares to strike the hour, you hear the rhythmic whirring of the fly governor, a mechanical hiss of air resistance that regulates the strike train. Then comes the boom, the rhythmic hammer hitting the great bell with a force that shatters the midnight stillness for 5 miles. This is the acoustic of the sovereignty. The time is no longer God's, it is the king's. The clock tower is the brain of the fortress, a mechanical pulse that drives the history of the state forward, one tick at a time, while the king occupies the velvet silence of the solar. The inner gatehouse is the site of a much more acoustic and earthy vigil. This is the rhythm of the guardroom dicing. You enter a stone-vaulted chamber where the air is dense and opaque, smelling of burnt tallow, stale, small ale, unwashed wool, cold iron, and old tobacco pipe ash, though the latter is an anachronism. The smell is that of charred herbs used for the lungs. The transition is one of biological boredom. The acoustic of the defense is not just the clank of mail, but the rhythmic clatter of bone dice against a scored oak table. This is a boring necessity of the medieval night, the psychological management of men who must remain awake but idle for 10 hours. The visual rhythm is flickering and rough. You watch the soldiers huddled around a single iron sconce, their shadows leaping against the limestone walls in a rhythmic choreography of the boredom. The rhythm is found in the shake, shake, throw of the dicecuppa, hollow, rhythmic rattling of bone on wood that vibrates the ale tankards. This is the acoustic of the chants. You see the rhythmic movement of the gnarled hands as they sweep the lead tokens or silver groats across the table. This is the boring history of the military subculture, the way the tension of the watch is redirected into the rhythm of the game. You feel the thermal stagnation of the room. The central hearth is smoking, creating a rhythmic swirl of gray that stings the eyes and hangs in the still air like a static cloud. The sensation of the guardroom is gritty and heavy. The floor rushes here are not fresh lavender, but crushed straw and mud, creating a damp, rhythmic crunch under every boot step. This is the acoustic of the commonality. You hear the rhythmic slurp of pottage being sucked from a wooden bowl and the low-frequency drone of soldier talk, the rhythmic recitation of old wars, bad rations, and distant wives. This is the oral history of the rank and file. The scent is salty and sharp, the smell of the salt beef being chewed to stay awake. This is the chemistry of the alertness. The salt dehydrates the men, forcing them to rhythmically sip the bitter ale which in turn fuels the rhythm of the conversation. The boring necessity of the guardroom vigil is the maintenance of the threshold. Every hour, one man rises with a rhythmic creak of the bench and clinks his way to the iron grill to peer into the darkness of the bailey. This is the rhythm of the peripheral scan. He listens for the irregularity in the night acoustic, the shifting of a horse, or the rattle of a latch that we explored in section 21. When he returns to the table, the rhythm of the dice resumes. This is the mechanical loop of the soldier's night, a pulsing of boredom that is interrupted only by the watch change. As the candle gutters in its iron holder, the men-at-arms sink into a rhythmic lethargy, their eyes tracking the dice with a hypnotic stare that erases the minutes of the deep night. The final sensory anchor of the castle night lies at the base of the North Tower in the royal kennels. This is the rhythm of the kennel sleep. You enter a space that is biological and primal, smelling of wet dog fur, raw marrow bones, fermenting straw, and warm animal breath. The transition is one of deep, communal heat. In this room, 40 great hounds, greyhounds, bloodhounds, and mastiffs are intertwined in a single pulsing mass of fur. This is the acoustic of the Paxil. The sound is a symphony of muffled respiration, a rhythmic sighing, snuffling, and whining that vibrates the wooden partitions. The visual rhythm is undulating and organic. You see the rhythmic heave of a dozen flanks, rising and falling in synchronized slumber. In the dull glow of the groom's lantern, the coats of the hounds fawn, brindle, and black appear like a moving carpet of animal energy. This is the boring history of the venery, the maintenance of the predatory potential. The rhythm is found in the twitching of a paw or the rhythmic flutter of an eyelid as a mastiff dreams of the boar hunt. This is the acoustic of the subconscious chase, the soft, rhythmic bark that never leaves the throat, appearing only as a microscopic vibration of the dewlap. The sensation of the kennel is stiflingly warm. The pack generates its own thermal microclimate, a radiant heat that defies the stone cold of the North Tower. This is the chemistry of the huddle. You feel the rhythmic weight of the silence, not a dead silence, but a living, breathing stasis. The scent is oily and musky, the lanolin from the dogskins reacting with the ammonia of the straw bedding. This is the olfactory signature of the hunter. You watch the kennel master as he sleeps. Among the dogs, his rhythmic snoring merging with the biological pulse of the pack. He is the human link to the animal world, his thermal signature accepted by the hounds as one of their own. The boring necessity of the kennel vigil is the prevention of the pack strife. If a hound startles in its night dream and snaps at a neighbor, the rhythm of the sleep can explode into a rhythm of violence. The kennel master wakes at the first rhythmic snarl, his voice a low, calming murmur, a rhythmic hush, hush, down, that resets the biological peace. This is the rhythm of the control, as the pre-dawn bird from section 24 chirps outside the stone vent. The hounds stir with a rhythmic shaking of ears, a sudden flapping percussion that signals the end of the nocturnal rest. The Paxil fractures into individual energies, ready for the rhythm of the leash and the heat of the chase. This is the final, biological pulse of the castle night, the deep, warm heartbeat of the forest warriors, waiting for the sun.